Hello, good evening, and many thanks for joining us this evening on Rwanda Television News. It's a 360 degrees right here on Rwanda Television, and as you are already aware, this is a show where we talk about different aspects that are actually affecting human life and everything that we have to live with in our daily lives, be it politics, be it social or even economic aspects of our daily lives. And this particular show, we are going to be looking at energy on the African continent as our main topic and focus. And we are going to be actually, before we started this particular show, I was thinking we could not be here, you wouldn't be able to watch us if it wasn't for the sense of energy and electricity in general. So this is an important aspect in human life, mostly in this particular era. And if we take our eyes off it, we would just be trying to ignore an important factor, which actually matters a lot in our life. Talking about energy and electricity plus connectivity in general, today up to 770 million people live without access to electricity, most of whom are still in Africa and the Asian continent. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that came with it put an end to several years of continued progress and worsened the already low energy purchasing power of households in developing countries, particularly on the African continent. And this is what we are going to be looking at in this particular show. Allow me to welcome on our show, starting from my far left, Mr. John Nelson. He is the chairman of Smart Village. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. Allow me to also welcome Mr. Silas Bizimungu, who chairs the industrial engagement and is part of organizing this year's Power Africa conference. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
All right. I was just saying that energy is an important factor in human life, that we really can't take our eyes off it. And even if we try to do it, we would just be deceiving ourselves. This year's conference is being held under the theme Convergence of National and Off-Grid Systems, and talking about energy, talking about electricity, talking about connectivity. I would just start by asking Mr. Nelson, how do we stand today? I guess if we are to address something, the first thing is being honest with ourselves and knowing where we stand, so as to start from there to bring about solutions to already existing problems. How do we stand in terms of energy access and connectivity on the African continent?
That's a very interesting question, because Africa has roughly 1.2 billion people. And you'd mentioned, 700 million people without access to electricity. 500 million of those people live in Africa. And so if you look at the energy usage, Africa is very low as far as the usage. If you compare it with the United States, and I'm going to use a term kilowatt hour, so let's just think about the units. We use roughly 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, for the people in the United States. Within Africa, it's only 3. So, there's quite a discrepancy between what's being used in developed countries versus Africa.
All right.
And you've got to realize Africa is the second largest continent, and as far as the energy usage, it's probably the lowest.
All right, Mr. Silas, if we are to talk about this particular matter, what brings about all this that he just mentioned, the difficulties and low access to energy on the African continent, what brings about it? What's the main cause?
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to appreciate my colleague Nelson, what he has brought across. What I think is, well, energy is an expensive thing, I can say. It's expensive. First of all, to generate it, transmit it, and deliver it to the customers. So that combined together makes the kilowatt or the unit cost a little bit high compared to the ability or the purchasing power of our people in them. That's the first thing. Second thing is, you look at the investment required to have to generate, for example, a kilowatt. If you look at where you're supposed to, the resources available in our continent. Let me give an example of Rwanda. If you look at hydro, you need the rivers. And you'll find that not all countries are blessed with such natural resources. You know that in the African continent, we have some part of the continent is a desert. You look at, that's the part of hydro, first thing. Second thing is you can go for thermal. If you think about thermal, then you're thinking about heavy fuel, HFO, you're thinking about diesel, and that is also not, we are not much blessed in this part of the world with that resource.
All right.
So to acquire that and to get what you need as a fuel, because the fuel in the case of generation can be water, can be it can be water, it can be diesel, it can be HFO, it can be gas, natural gas for those countries that are blessed with natural gas. For us on our side, we have methane gas from the lakes. So all those resources, they are there. But to invest in them, to harness them and get what you are seeing here as light, because the end consumer, what you will see is just the light. But the process that you go through to achieve that light is damn expensive. Now, it requires a lot of effort and a lot of financing from governments to subsidize it, to make it affordable to the end user. So that is one of the things that is still a challenge. How much of the national budget are governments in Africa willing to invest in the energy sector? First, to harness the resources to convert them into electricity. Two, to subsidize and make it affordable to the clients.
All right.
That is a bit tricky. The other part of it that is making it more complicated is the settlement pattern. Because you need people, if in developed countries, you find that people settle in areas that are, let's say, in towns. So delivering services to such people is quite easy and affordable.
All right.
In our countries, many countries in Africa, you can drive for 100 kilometers, I don't see any family. So that one makes it very complicated to enable them access electricity and energy as a whole. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Nelson, talking about settlement patterns as one of the causes of less access to energy on the African continent, talking about what you just mentioned, the investments. Despite all these challenges being at hand, one of the main sustainable development goals is that by 2030, at least the world will have full access to electricity and energy at the rate of 100%. And to get exact to the numbers, 100 million people must be connected to electricity each year so as to achieve this particular goal. For the challenges he just talked about, how can we tap into them, mostly on the African continent, be it the investment part, be it the settlement patterns, to really get to the matter of solving this particular issue and get to achieve access to energy and connectivity?
I see one of the challenges within Africa is the fact that we have 54 separate countries, where if you go back to the United States, we have 50 states. And it's very easy within the United States, because we're under one country, to be able to have interconnection from one state to another. I see, the infrastructure being, one of the challenges within Africa. With 54 countries, with each country having different standards, different practices, different policies, different amount of generation, I see that as a real challenge. Africa has
do we lack policies? Are we short of policies to really address this problem?
There are some challenges with policies. For example, if you go to the United States, you have certain electrical standards. You go to Europe, you have different electrical standards. In the United States, we have the American National Institute of Standards, ANSI. Within Europe, we have the International Electric Commission standards, IEC. When we come to Africa, we're not unified as far as having standards like this. So that's one of the challenges we have in developing, the power systems, the generation, distribution, and so forth. The other challenge that you have here is the fact that you have all of these communities that have access to no electricity right now. And we're talking literally, I think in Africa, thousands of communities that we're trying to bring power to. My position within IEEE Smart Village is such that we have 3 pillars that we're trying to support off-grid communities. And we're doing this around the world, including Africa. We have an Africa working group that is helping us in this area. And this is a working group that we put together in IEEE. IEEE is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. We're the largest professional organization with over 400,000 members. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to provide, or take this expertise and place it into remote areas. you know, Africa being probably the most remote area. I was at a conference just a few weeks ago where we were talking about the Starlink, you know, the satellite links with, that have been put up there. And the market for that right now is in Europe and in the United States, North America, and so forth.
All right.
What's interesting is there's a lack of communications within Africa. With 1.2 billion people, you know, they've got an opportunity to start being able to communicate, you know, throughout Africa. This is going to help us with the electric system too, because we need to have proper communications, need to be able to talk to our plants, talk to our electrical substations, and so forth. So there are many challenges there. Does that make sense?
All right, it does make a lot of sense. But talking about addressing these challenges, Mr. Silas, what do we really need to do first? As in prioritizing actions that need to be done one by one, putting them on the priority list to know what we need to do first, so as to really put out all these challenges and achieve the connectivity and energy access.
You see, this thing is two-way. There are discussions out there where people say, should governments start by building the infrastructure, to the distribution systems, to get closer to the clients so that you create the demand? Because here you're looking at two things. You're looking at the supply and the demand. So should governments first of all create demand, or should they first of all create the supply?
All right.
So this is also complicated because you cannot, electricity, you can't store electricity. You generate it, you deliver it.
All right.
So now you look at it, governments, so they have to move in parallel. And you have to increase on supply, increase on demand, so that at least they are relatively on the same level. So what our countries need to do, first of all, is to encourage and improve on the settlement patterns, to get people settle in areas where they are like, in our country, we call them Mudugudu. Like small towns where people get together and they will get services, both health services, education, and energy, of course. So once that is achieved itself, it will be a motivation that when you start energy supply, an increase on energy access or electricity access, it will be much easier than the current situation that we have in most developing countries, third world countries. So that means, so first we need also to work on the settlement pattern first. Secondly, then you have to, after working on the settlement pattern, secondly, governments need to put a lot of investments to commit finances to, and of course, when I talk about governments, I'm also talking about financial institutions like IMF, World Bank, FDB. They do quite a good job in that sector. They need to commit funds to ensure that people access energy. So such funds, but of course, that also goes along with the planning.
All right.
Because even in our developing countries, if you go to very many utilities, you find there are gaps in planning. That's why you'll find that today people will say, okay, look, in the next 5 years, we need to give access to 100% of 70 or 60%. Depending on each country, it has different percentages. But you have to look back and say, is this percentage achievable? How is the settlement pattern?
All right.
Then that comes to our theme of this Power Africa Conference, the convergence of national and off-grid systems. So if the settlement pattern is not well coordinated, that means you need to go for the off-grid. I look at you as an individual, as a home. I give you a small solar panel that will give you, maybe you need 5 lamps or 3 lamps or 2 lamps. So I will consider that part. The parts of the continent that don't have a settlement pattern that is coordinated, you look at the off-grid systems. Then the parts that have a coordinated settlement pattern, you look at the on-grid or the national systems that supply them. Now, but that also has a challenge that utilities or governments have to look at. You're going to increase the off-grid penetration into the network or into the villages. Who is going to take care of the maintenance? Because now they will be breaking down. Maybe these solar systems will be breaking down on and now and again.
All right.
If someone is in Nyamasheke or is in Rusizi in the deep village, he even doesn't know that a technician who is supposed to do the maintenance of what he has. Or is he even able to pay for such maintenance cost?
All right.
of the off-grid, of the solar panel that the government has subsidized to provide to him.
All right.
So these are things that have to look at. You need planning, you need investment, you need to work on the settlement pattern.
Mr. Silas, allow me to cut you off. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a citizen who is right now in Rusizi or Nyagatare district, or even here in Kigali. Do they really have a role to play towards achieving this?
Definitely, yes. They do have a great role to play in achieving all this. You see, the government, let me take an example of Rwanda, because at least that I have enough information or some information, sufficient information on that. They have really encouraged citizens to start staying in villages.
In planned settlements.
Planned settlements, thank you. Now, the government will emphasize that, but they will not push someone and force him that, look, you have to move tomorrow. So you have to play your role as a citizen and understand, what do I benefit in going to a planned settlement? I benefit access to health, I benefit access to energy, quality electricity, I benefit access to education. Once people change their mindset and understand it is more beneficial to them than to the people who are encouraging them to go there, then that thing will help greatly the government. Secondly, people have a role to play in terms of because if the government can't provide everything 100% free, unless you're becoming a state that is ready to provide everything to people, but then you're making people very lazy. People have at least to do something.
All right.
So individuals or homes or people have to make some small contribution, whatever they can afford. Or they can have something like like we have in the health insurance in Rwanda, where people put in some money, then it helps also the poor.
All right.
So how do we also harness that component? Where do we say, maybe there are those who can afford. Maybe they will be paying more for the unit cost of electricity. Then that extra percent they are paying, can we convert it and compensate it and use it to help the person who is poor also get electricity?
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Nelson, I love that you really challenged us on what has been done in other continents in terms of integrating different systems, actually integrating policies all together, as this is a common problem. It's not for one particular country. Challenges, how can this be adapted on the African continent to really achieve what we want?
You know, we're very fortunate at this day and age with the technology that we have. Because when you look at the development of electricity, let's say in the United States or within Europe, we went from a top-down type of approach. In fact, we'd put the generation in, we'd build distribution lines out, and feed the communities and the houses that way. With the technology we have today, we can actually work bottom-up and top-down. And this is the way that I envision what's going to happen within Africa, because we've got these communities that don't have access to electricity right now. So we go into one community and we can put in the solar panels. And what we do within IEEE and my group is we look for entrepreneurs. We want people to go out there and basically create a business to sell electricity. Now, when you look at the value of electricity, you know, what are you getting from that value? What are you getting for that value? And what we found is that, you know, the cost of electricity may be, you know, I'm using US dollars and so forth, let's say 20 cents or 30 cents. If a person is paying that kind of money for it, and they're able to go out and build a cold box to store food, agriculture, that cost, that value per kilowatt hour could now be $2 or $3 or more, because they're able to keep their produce until market day, rather than having it spoil. So that's a major aspect right there, I believe.
And who are we challenging? Who are we challenging? Who really needs to put this matter at heart so that they can address it in particular? Who are we challenging mainly? Is it the authorities? Is it the citizens? Is it stakeholders and different other partners? Who are we really challenging in this regard?
I believe we're challenging everyone. You know, we're challenging government because they've got a major issue here trying to bring electricity to the villages. But I think we also have to look at the individuals. You know, what we're trying to do, you know, within Power Africa and within IEEE is we're trying to develop businesses out there, such as an entrepreneur that will go and put in a small solar system. You know, we're doing this in many countries within Africa. And what they're doing is they're then developing these plants, these facilities that they could sell electricity to the community. You know, some of the simple uses of electricity would be perhaps a few solar panels with a kiosk, and they use it for a charging station. And you know, the folks in remote areas have the cell phones, but they don't have electricity. So they can go in and maybe pay, you know, some money to get their phones charged and so forth. So that's one business. The second thing is by creating these energy plants, primarily right now I'm talking the community type, we're looking at solar panels. And we're looking at the fact that we're going to have some type of communications with the outside world. It could be Starlink, it could be anything else. And that allows us to bring in education opportunities for the community. We're finding that just bringing in electricity doesn't empower the community. We need to have electricity, we need to have education, and that could be, you know, for the primary schools, secondary schools, it could be vocational training. So we have those opportunities. And then third, we're creating businesses. You know, like I mentioned, one business might be, you know, providing refrigeration. Another business might be let's say a grocery that's got some coolers for soda pop or for soft drinks and so forth. And, you know, we're creating these businesses, and what this allows is for the community to gain ownership of the entire system. So we're coming from the bottom up, but at the same time, we need to come from the top down. You know, we still need the central power stations. You know, when you look at Kigali as an example, you know, can you provide that, you know, the entire city with photovoltaic? You know, it doesn't make sense because we have a concentration of loads there. And so we need to look at a generating station that has, you know, density of electricity, you know, a lot of capability there. So we're going to be working from the top down, the bottom up. So if you take a look at one of the communities, we may have, you know, let's say in Rwanda, Nigeria, or whatever. We go ahead and we bring in solar power there. And then the neighboring city community sees, you know, that's creating benefits here. So they're wanting to do the same. So these two communities are going to interconnect with each other, and to the third and the fourth. And then the main grid, national grid, is going to be coming in the other direction. So we're designing all of these so then in the long term, we'll be able to interconnect and develop a system, top down, bottom up, and work it that way.
All right, perfect. You had something to add?
No, proceed.
All right. Talking about what he was actually saying, electricity will in the end affect every other sector, be it the education sector, the industrial sector, the technology advancement sector, every aspect. But how can we really quicken the small steps that are being taken currently to get to where we want fast as we can? And this goes with the question that we really want to achieve full access to energy and electricity by 2030. Is this possible? Is there even one point of possibility? This goes to both of you. I'll start with you, Silas.
Thank you. So being ambitious is very important in life. And of course, we have to keep pessimistic and we have to set goals. So you set a goal and you work towards it. So as a goal that we have set, whether as a continent or as a country, we have to strive and set up policies, deliberate policies, and invest in that to make sure we achieve that. But how and whether we will achieve that will depend on the individual efforts of individual states. Let me call them governments now at this moment. Because the energy sector, we have been focusing a lot on electricity, but let's look at the energy sector as a whole. When you look at the energy sector as a whole, then you're looking at someone in the village should be able to cook and not pollute the environment. That's where we're heading. This is in the developing countries. How do we achieve that? Because that one person needs to look at clean cooking. Actually, in the IEEE Power Africa conference that we've been having, on the first day we looked, among the discussions and tutorials we looked at that. We looked at this renewable energy, and then we looked at clean cooking. So how do we achieve that for someone who is in the village to be able to have light in his house, charge his phone, be able to switch on light at night, wake up, maybe if he has a baby who's crying, has to look at what's happening in the room. 2, he should be able to go back in the kitchen and cook. So how do we get the cheap cooking means? How do we get, and clean, of course. Because if you look at, we are talking about clean, we are looking at environmental friendly. So that is a policy that should be in place and should be emphasized and also invested in. Thirdly, then we move to now let's say we have made a step. In Rwanda now we are encouraging a lot of electric cars or hybrid, whatever. So it can be both.
All right.
So now that is a bigger step that we are taking, because you need to reduce the fossil fuel consumption. Because first it is expensive, and also these are things that get depleted. These are natural resources that get depleted. But how do we have policies that are deliberate to ensure that, for example, do we have sufficient, if, for example, today I order for an electric car, how long will it take me to get it?
All right.
In this part of the world? Because that is also encouraging. Maybe you have planned, you say next month I need to be having a drive, but I need an electric car. How possible and how feasible is it for you to get it? How am I going, if I drive from here to the farthest point of any country, am I going to get a charging station there to be able to charge it? So these are in the entire energy sector, these are policies we have to look at. The energy policy should be focusing on all those points. Look at electricity to supply someone, look at someone is able to cook, someone is able to drive from point A to point B. The public transport also should be looking at focusing on that. How do we get trains that are electric? Those are things that will be working. Of course, these are big investments, but the ambitions, like you said, and the goal that we have set is achievable. The how and when will depend on individual governments and individual efforts from different parts of the world or from different institutions. Yes.
All right.
No, it's quite interesting. You mentioned the electric vehicles. You know, these are being subsidized within the United States, you know, with tax dollars. And one of the major challenges we have there are the charging stations. You know, we're looking at a totally new infrastructure with the charging stations. You know, people right now, they have gas stations every place. They can go 5 or 10 miles at the most, you know, and get a gas station, you know. So that's the infrastructure that would have to be developed to create that. The other thing is, if you're looking at electric vehicles, do you want to buy an electric vehicle from China, from the US, from Europe? No, you want to bring the manufacturing to Africa. We need to have the manufacturing, you know, in Africa. That's going to increase, you know, the support of building the electric systems and so forth. So that's beneficial. You asked if it's possible to be 100% connected by the year 2030, I believe you said. That's the first time I've heard that as some type of a goal. You know, most of the goals I'm hearing is we're going to be carbon free by 2050, we're going to be this and that and everything else. I personally feel that it's practically impossible to have 100% connectivity by the year 2030. The reason I say that is if you look at Africa, I mentioned earlier, you have 1.2 billion people. You have a 3.7% birth rate. So 44 million people, babies are being born each year. So just imagine trying to supply electricity to 500 million people that don't have electricity, add another close to 50,000 each year. So that's a major challenge, you know, right there. And, you know, that's not just, you know, within Africa. The other thing is look at the other developing countries and what they're doing right now energy-wise. If you look at the United States, the energy consumption has been relatively constant. Likewise, the CO2 export, you know, production. Europe, the same way. You look at Africa, Africa is very low on the production. You know, you take a look at Nigeria as an example, 4,000 megawatt peak. You know, I think we have close to 1,000 megawatt peak in the United States. So, you know, you've got that inequity there, that challenge right there. So there's some major challenges trying to get electricity to everybody. And then the other thing you have to consider is there are folks that may not want electricity. Believe it or not, within the United States, and Canada, we have a number of indigenous folks that have no access to electricity. And it's interesting, you know, listening to some of the tribal chiefs and so forth, you know, on their biases towards having electricity or not having it. So there are challenges. And I would, I think it'd be a major challenge to try to get, 100% connectivity in Africa, let alone, the rest of the world. The other thing is you have to look at where Africa is going. You look at the population growth, you look at what's happening in Asia, in India, in China, with the tremendous increase in electricity and energy that they're using. Africa's way down here. There's going to have to be, to serve these people, a massive increase in electric energy or energy per se.
All right.
What's also interesting is, the climate change is presenting a major challenge to everyone. Now, there are people that are called climate change deniers, climate change alarmists. We don't need to be naming people, like this. What we need to look at is work together on this. And as an example, we're seeing a lot of push to do away with fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are not going to go away, because if you look at this table, it's made out of fossil fuel. You look at the pharmaceuticals, it's fossil fuel. You look at the reserves of fossil fuels within Africa. They're valued at over $15 trillion. $15 trillion. That's $15,000 billion. Imagine what that could do for Africa. So you've got a resource here that, are you going to say, no, we're not going to look at it? You need to look at it, use it practically. It's not an infinite supply, so we need to basically manage it in a proper way. And the managing may be that we look at, presently, we're relying heavily on hydro, which is great because it's renewable, fossil fuels, and we're trying to come up with the renewable energies. We don't want to fight each other, because we've got to work together to bring the renewables up, the fossil fuels down. That's not going to happen overnight.
All right. All right. I just love the idea, and I will start from where he actually ended. Clean energy in Africa is something that I would love to use the word has been abandoned, and I think it would be the right term to use in this regard, as actually only a few African countries have put energy in developing, actually put efforts in developing and integrating clean energy, which is environmental friendly. How do you see the matter, Mr. Silas?
Well, you see, when you're going to do something, you always prefer to start with what you have, what is readily available to you. So in most African countries, or in our countries, you find that what is readily available is what we call unclean energy. Let me call it that way. It's what is readily available, and it's what might be cheap. Because I can go in the bush, cut my two woods, and then I just make firewood and cook. I'm not paying any coin for that. Someone in the village is sending his kids, go, today we need to cook this in the evening, so go and gather some firewood and bring it here. Because this is what is readily available to them. Now, what we need, what we are calling clean energy. First of all, how do the local people perceive clean energy? They don't see it as an issue, because they even don't consider it as a big deal because he has grown up in that environment. I'm mainly focusing on the developing part of the world. They have grown up in an environment that he has used this firewood, for example, to cook. He has used the small lamp to light his house for the whole of his life. So if we were to change the pattern, can we begin with people who have been going to institutions, people who are attending school, people who are attending universities? What are even our institutions doing, for example? Let me go to universities and vocational training colleges. What are they doing to educate and align the engineers and technicians to be fully equipped with what the industry needs as in terms of clean energy?
Still on that, before you go on, in your own perspective, are they doing enough?
Not really. I think not really.
Not even close.
Yes, they are trying, but there is a need of a deliberate effort by the institutions and by the government, that the government institutions that supervise the colleges and universities. Here I'm trying to say that, look, for example, we are emphasizing solar energy to go to villages because of off-grid issues to satisfy the off-grid percentage that we need. But definitely each country will have an off-grid network. But in our countries, then it becomes even more necessary and more inevitable because you have people that are very far away from the national grid. So they will need solar panels. They will need cooking. They will need to give them some simple cooking stoves and all that. So let's go to focus on solar panels, for example, because this is being emphasized and countries have even cut taxes or even put them at zero tax to make sure their people access them. Now, our universities really focusing on the technology that is currently being used. Let me give an example of the companies we have here. In the solar sector, we have, for example, we have Bbox, you have Mobisol. Then I think there are many more than that, of course. So let me focus on those. They are producing some kind of technology. Our universities looking at, and colleges looking at the technology they are using and say, within the next maybe 5 years, we are going to have a penetration of renewable or clean energy to this level. How do we align our graduates to be able to go to those villages, to do the maintenance of those panels? Are we even nearer that? I think we are still far away from that because the institutions, maybe the graduates think that I'm going to maybe get some good formulas and next day I get a bachelor's, I get my master's and then proceed. But this is not what we are focusing on. Two, our business people, now I'm going to the private sector. Our business people looking at this technology is penetrating to the deep villages. Can I buy spare parts for these components that are being supplied? Because the solar panel is not just this panel you put on top of the roof. You have much more than that. So how do we have those components readily available? If someone is in the deep village, I go to the closest town, I can be able to buy something that I need to replace because there's wear and tear over time. That is normal for electrical gadgets. So the private sector needs to play its role, the government needs to play its role, but also the citizens need to play their role. And then the institutions of learning, higher institutions of learning have to double their efforts on that point.
All right. I guess we have really seen how worse this situation is on our continent, mostly in the sub-Saharan Africa. And now I'm just wondering, where do we really need to tap to find a solution to this very huge problem that is still hindering development in different aspects? As I said, at the end of the day, energy affects the industrial sector, which we need. The energy affects the education sector. It affects every kind, including the media sector that we are using right now to disseminate this particular information. But what do we do? What do we do? Because at the end of the day, we can't keep whipping and pinpointing that this is the problem. We need to do something and take some particular steps to get out of this issue. Mr. Nelson, how do we really get out of this issue? I guess it's not one thing that we need to do. It's different integrated solutions and policies that need to be put into practice to achieve this. But in your own perspective, what needs to come first?
You know, that's a very good question. You know, the first thing I think we need to do is take baby steps. You know, we basically need to set up some type of a plan, you know, on how to move forward. You know, if I had the exact answer for your question, I think I would probably be an Elon Musk, you know, with $250 billion, because, you know, that's a very complex question that you asked. It's like what we're doing right now within Power Africa. You know, we're meeting with, you know, people throughout Africa, and you know, we're trying to educate them. I think education is going to be a very key.
Yeah, right.
Whether it's education towards educating the government, educating the citizens, educating the businesses. So I think education is very important, but it's a real challenge. The other thing I think we need to do is we need to look at Africa as a continent instead of 54 individual countries. I think we need to work together from country to country to develop the solutions. Because I look at the fact that, you know, we're talking top down, bottom up, you know, within, let's say, Rwanda. However, we need to do that, you know, throughout the entire African continent.
All right.
So I think we need to look at that. The second thing is we need to look at developing businesses in Africa. one of the things that we're finding within the solar industry is there are countries that are basically, I hate to use the term dumping, but they're dumping poor quality products. And what's happening is people are saying, well, I can buy this panel for, you know, such and such a savings. If that panel fails in 6 months, you know, they're there without, you know, any solar panels. So we need to look at the quality. The other thing is, on the solar panels as an example, we're buying those outside of Africa. You know, we need to bring in manufacturing facilities to do that in Africa. We need to claim the ownership of our future. And to do that, I think we need to build up, you know, businesses. We need to build up governments. We need to, you know, educate the individuals and so forth. I think it's a major challenge. It really is a challenge.
All right, it's really a major challenge. Talking about ownership, and one of the important aspects you just mentioned about it needs to be addressed in terms of not as an individual country issue, but collectively as the African continent. But integrating systems, Mr. Silas, integrating systems, integrating policies, integrating infrastructure to really bring about the impact that we want is still a problem. How can we really get to the common ground, to the common goal and common interest of you know, addressing this issue as a common problem, not an individual country problem?
Thank you very much. Fortunately, we are not trying to discover something new. The integration of systems has existed for so many years. The largest interconnected network we have, I think, is the continental Europe. They have a very good working system, interconnected system, in terms of to ensure that their citizens, the European citizens, are able to access electricity. If I have a deficit in my country, I will buy from you. So it's like a market. So where the buyer, willing seller. So we have where to copy from. We have where to start from. That's in the developing world. Now, going back to Africa. We have come from far. We are heading somewhere, and it's quite promising. And there are efforts to achieve that. I think what we need to look to emphasize more is now utilities in different countries need to start to work together. In this Power Africa conference that is ongoing, which will be ending Friday, we have different stakeholders. In the African continent, starting from the south, of course, we have the South African Power Pool, which looks at all the South African countries. Then we have the East African Power Pool looking at East Africa. We have Central Africa. We have West African Power Pool, North African Power Pool. The unfortunate part is that, for as of now, you know, there is an animal called the chameleon. The chameleon, the left eye and its right eye, they don't communicate. The left eye doesn't know what the right eye is doing. And this is what I think we're experiencing in Africa.
All right.
So where we have all these power pools, but these power pools are not looking at how do we harness the potential we have to interconnect our networks, so that if I have, for example, in Rwanda, I have a deficit. Of course, hydro is the cheapest, I can say, on the market so far, in terms of electricity. So hydro, that is from water. But it is not readily available in all countries. But we have countries which have excess. So how do these power pools, can they work together and stop behaving like the eye of a chameleon?
All right.
The left eye should know what the right eye is doing. I have cheaper source and I have excess. You have more expensive sources, shut them down, get from me. So there should be a deliberate effort, and I think it should be spearheaded by the African Union, because that is the body that we have that can govern the entire continent, that has a say on the entire continent. So the African Union should work with maybe the African Development Bank, because these are African institutions first.
All right.
They can get support which is external, but it should begin with us. The charity begins at home. How does it begin with us? So let them work together and look at how do we get these power pools and these utilities because we have interconnections. I'm telling you, like here we have very many interconnections. There is an interconnection going on between Rwanda and Burundi. There's one between Uganda and Rwanda, between Rwanda and Congo, and between Kenya and Tanzania. But all these ones, they are not well coordinated in a way that someone in Egypt knows that one day Tanzania is going to interconnect with Kenya, hence connecting Cape Town to Cairo.
All right.
This is ongoing, but there is no concerted effort that, look, one day someone will cross a connector between Tanzania and Kenya, or actually Tanzania is interconnecting with Zambia. So one day someone is going to cross an interconnector between Tanzania and Zambia, hence bringing the South African countries, connecting them to East Africa, and Kenya is already interconnecting with Ethiopia. Now, you're going to interconnect Cairo to Egypt, but which body is going to supervise that?
The African Union.
And you're talking 54 countries.
Exactly.
You're talking different governments. You're talking different languages.
Different policies.
So but the other thing is when you start looking at trying to connect South Africa to Ethiopia, you know, the distance of that is such that we have very complex systems where there could be what we call stability problems.
Yes.
And within the United States, believe it or not, we have 3 separate grids. We have the Eastern United States, we have the Western United States, and they're interconnected with a DC link. So they're basically going from AC to DC. And then you've got your Texas, which is the ERCOT system. So that again is interconnected with DC. So that's going to be a technical issue that's going to have to be solved within Africa because South Africa has probably got a very strong system. You come up to Rwanda, what do you have, 200 megawatts?
Yes.
Very weak system. So if you try to tie the 2 systems together, what happens is it's like tying 2 elephants together with a string. You know, South Africa is going to try to lead this. And then Rwanda is going to try to pick up. And South Africa is going to try to back off. And you're going like this, and then all of a sudden it's like those 2 elephants walking
In other
apart.
words, it's just a collective effort. And as we draw close, gentlemen, just in 30 seconds, are you optimistic about the future?
Yes, personally I'm optimistic because we are seeing something is being done. Countries are making efforts. We are meeting as utilities of different countries. Different countries, the utilities are meeting. Of course, at a lower level, but we need now to put it at an advanced and a higher level. And then we need someone, the coordination center. We need, like Africa, to have a coordination center of what is going on in different parts of the continent. Yes.
Mr. Nelson, are you optimistic?
I am optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic. You know, because I see a lot of challenges there. And, you know, when you have these challenges, you know, I like to look at challenges rather than problems. So I think we've got some challenges there that need to be resolved. I think we've got some issues that need to be resolved. And it's just like the governments and so forth.
All right.
I'm optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
All right. Mr. Nelson John, the chairman of Smart Village, thank you very much for gracing us with your presence.
Appreciated the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silas Bizimungu.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right. And this absolutely brings us to the end of our tonight's edition of 360 Degrees. And indeed, the energy sector is so crucial to every part of the life that we live and each and everything we do, be it in the education, industrial, and technology sector. And it's indeed a collective effort. And as they just mentioned, we do not need to be like a chameleon where the left eye and the right eye do not communicate, but we need to interlink to collectively address this particular issue. Until next time, my name is Sam Kalisa. Stay safe and have a good evening.